Again, why now?
Yeah, well, the why now is the same as the why in general, which is that the country's in trouble. The country's headed in the wrong direction. Internationally, we have huge threats. Here at home, we have record high inflation. We have a border crisis, which is leading to 5,000 people dying from fentanyl. Crime's on the rise. It's a moment where we need leadership, and so that's why I'm running. I've been blessed. I'm a Pennsylvania kid. I've lived the American dream. I grew up in Bloomsburg, as we talked about. My family had a farm. I grew up in town and played sports and wrestled and played football. And I've gone on and served in the military and had a successful business career. And this is the moment, if you believe in America, that and you think you can make a difference, this is when you do it, and now's the time.
What do you think, Dave, will be different about your campaign this time, if anything at
Yeah,
all?
well, it was my first shot at running for elected office, and so when you do something for the first time, you learn lots of new things. I think what's different this time is certainly that I'm more confident about the path that we need to take as a country, and that the situation has gotten much worse. And so I think 80% of Pennsylvanians think the country's headed in the wrong direction. So we're talking about the future of America. And I'm running obviously against an incumbent in Bob Casey. Bob Casey's 30 years in public life, 17 years in the Senate, and he's really not made significant contributions during his 17-year career in the Senate. He's not had any landmark legislation, and he's voted 98% of the time with Joe Biden. So it's really a contrast between someone who was a Pennsylvania kid, has been a success story, served our country in the military, has led throughout his life, against a career politician who's a rubber stamp for Joe Biden. And that's what the race is about, in my opinion.
You talk about your background with Pennsylvania. We've seen, when I'm on the set and there I see the commercials attacking the fact your residency in Pennsylvania. What do you tell the people watching right now who want to know more about you and are wondering what that's all about? Where do you spend most of your time?
Yeah. In Pennsylvania. So I'm a Pennsylvanian. I've spent more than half my life in Pennsylvania. Most of the time that I didn't live in Pennsylvania, I was serving our country. 9 years in the military, 4 years in the federal government. I have a home in Pittsburgh where I spend a good bit of the time, and I have a farm we talked about in my hometown, where I also spend time, and I'm on the road across Pennsylvania. And so that's where I spend my time. I have a daughter who is my sixth daughter. I have six, and she's finishing high school in Connecticut. I'm divorced and remarried, and so she lives with her mom there. And so I do go to Connecticut to see my daughter, and that's a part of being a good dad, and I'm going to continue to do that. And I rent a home there, so I can do that when I'm there. And that's if there's a political cost associated with that, so be it.
I think we can all understand teenage kids wanting to finish school with their friends,
exactly.
where they started. But thank you for sorting that out for us. I'll let you take care of that. You can take it if you need to. Yeah. Let's talk about how you criticize President Biden with his economic agenda. Can you point out what's wrong with it and give us some specifics about programs or policies that you would support to fix those things?
Yeah. Well, what's obvious about it is it's not working for most Pennsylvanians, and most notably, inflation. So inflation is the consequence of excessive spending. And what happened over 20 years is Republicans and Democrats have both overspent. So Republicans are not without blame here. But under President Biden, spending went like this. It was like a hockey stick. So $5 trillion of incremental spending. And that's, even Democrats agree that that's the primary driver of inflation. And so for 60% of Pennsylvanians that live paycheck to paycheck, prices have gone up 20% and wages have gone up 15%. And so this is the primary problem with Bidenomics. It's helped people with 401ks and people with stock and people who own assets, but it hasn't helped the majority of Pennsylvanians. And so the first thing we have to do is pull back on that enormous spending that's happened under Joe Biden. The second thing is we have to find ways to grow our economy. And the most obvious way to do that is with natural gas. Pennsylvania is blessed by natural gas resources. If we were a country, we'd be the 5th largest natural gas reserves in the world. And just in the last couple of days, President Biden has come forward with a plan to stop additional permits for new LNG projects. This is a terrible idea. It's terrible for Pennsylvania. It's terrible for America. Terrible for our economy. Terrible for the environment, because natural gas is clean. Bob Casey waited for a week and then has finally come out and said he doesn't think that's a good idea. And this is the kind of leadership that Pennsylvania's had for 30 years, 17 years in the Senate by Bob Casey, which is not out in front fighting for what's needed for Pennsylvania.
Let's whittle that down just a little bit now. Let's just talk maybe gas prices.
Yeah.
Okay, even grocery prices, but let's talk about gas. What would you specifically do if you were in the Senate to try to bring those gas prices down to where we saw them a couple years ago?
Well, the most important thing you can do is embrace the idea of energy dominance. Pennsylvania and America is blessed with these incredible natural resources. And so I'm for all forms of energy. Alternative sources of energy, great. They just can't be so heavily subsidized that they distort our economy, which is what's happened under President Biden. So we need to embrace the fact that we're going to be an energy exporter, embrace the fact that we need to drill for natural gas, embrace the fact that we need to reform pipeline, have a reform for pipeline permitting so we can get that wonderful natural gas out of the ground in Pennsylvania and send it throughout the world. That would be the single most important thing you could do to bring prices down for all sources of energy.
How do you do that? It's a delicate balance while you protect the environment at the same time.
You know, this is the great irony of it. The Biden administration has said what they're doing is good for the environment, and in fact, it's not good for the environment, and here's why. Natural gas is one of the cleanest sources of energy, and so when we curtail our natural gas exports, what happens is that other sources of energy from around the world fill it. So when you have tankers sitting in Boston Harbor with crude from Nigeria or other places around the world, that's a less clean source of energy than our own natural gas right here in Pennsylvania. So in the greatest irony of ironies, the Biden administration's policies, which Bob Casey has supported every step of the way, has made us less secure because allies around the world are dependent on energy from Russia and elsewhere. It's hurt our economy because the natural gas economy in Pennsylvania is a huge source of growth, and it's hurt our environment because people substitute less clean forms of energy. So it's policy pursuing a goal that in fact it's not really pursuing. And the reason is that the climate lobby and the environmental lobby has pushed the Biden administration in a way that actually doesn't make sense, but is politically what they need to do.
Can we shift gears and talk
Sure.
about the Middle East a little bit? Would you support a plan of action with Iran due to the recent drone attacks that killed some of our armed forces? And do you support military action against Iran?
Yeah, we have to go to the source of what's happened here. So Iran is underwriting, it's financing terrorism across the region. So the terrible attack from Hamas into Israel, the attacks on our troops in Jordan, the attacks throughout the Middle East, the Houthis on the Red Sea, that's all from Iran. Iran is the source of the money. And the reason Iran has the money is because President Obama, President Biden, and Bob Casey, the deciding vote, voted in 2015 to give sanctions relief to Iran, so they had $100 billion, which they've now given to these terrorist organizations. So the most important thing we can do is strangle Iran's economic ability to support terrorism around the world. If I was sitting in the Senate right now, I'd be calling to put those sanctions back in place. And this is the original sin, and this is lies at the feet of President Biden and Bob Casey. They have not been strong in terms of the economic approach or the national security approach to Iran. Now we're in a bad spot because the world thinks we're weak, and President Biden has essentially created a world where the deterrence fails. And so now we have to restore deterrence. And yes, we're going to have to use military action in the Middle East in response to the 160 terrorist attacks we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months. How and where that should be directed, I'm not sure, but it needs to be disproportionate. So it's like if you get punched, if you're the bad guy and you're punching America, you need to know that if you punch us, you're going to get punched back 10 times harder. And President Biden's failed to do that. He's viewed as weak by the world, and that's why these attacks are happening, unfortunately. And I want to say one more word, which is just a word of absolute sadness and respect for the deaths of these three service members that died in Jordan a few days ago to these terrorist attacks. As someone who served in the military, someone who knows what it's like to see those lives being put on the line, that's we should not run past that. That's a huge sacrifice, and we're grateful.
Where do you stand on your position with the war going on between Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, I went to Israel right after Christmas. My wife and I went. My wife had worked for President Trump and had been very involved in negotiating the Abraham Accords, which was the peace deal in the Middle East. And so I toured one of the communities, Kfar Aza, which there's 700 residents, 100 butchered, massacred. I met with victims who had been shot on that day. I met with hostage families. You cannot imagine the evil, the beheadings, the burning families. I mean, this is awful. And a war from Hamas against Israel is not just about Israel. It's about the West. Iran is attacking the West. They explicitly say, down with the great Satan, which is America. So what we need to do is support Israel in its fight for its existence. This was the biggest butchery since the Holocaust. And they're living side by side with people who literally butchered their families. So they need to destroy Hamas and Hamas's ability to carry out violence against Israel. And they need to also do that in a way that solidifies their safety in a very dangerous neighborhood. So I'm supportive of doing that. It's in America's interest to do that. And I think we need to stay strong in our support for Israel.
Let's talk about Ukraine now. I also want to talk about that. How about the support there? What would you endorse rather as a level of help in Ukraine's conflict with Russia?
Yeah, this is such a sad situation because Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a huge human cost. But on top of that, this is a very bad for America's interest, because if Putin is successful at taking over Ukraine, that's not the last stop. And this could destabilize Europe. And we've been very benefited from the stability in Europe, in America, since World War II. Plus, if Putin is able to overcome Ukraine, that sends a real strong signal to China, which is our greatest adversary, about how strong we're going to stand with our allies. So I'm supportive of us trying to find ways to help Ukraine overcome this assault. The problem, and the reason this is so difficult, is the way President Biden, with Casey's support, has prosecuted the war. This would not have happened without the weak showing in Afghanistan, that debacle of a withdrawal. And it wouldn't have happened without mixed signals to President Putin. We approved this pipeline so Russia could export to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So very mixed signals. The day the invasion happened, Biden wanted to send a plane to Ukraine to help Zelensky escape. That was the mindset. And Putin saw that weakness. So I'm object to that. Then once the invasion happened, every little incremental step of the way. I mean, when you're in a fight, I know this is a military guy, you need what you need now. And so they've strung out all the military support over a year. And so now we're in a stalemate. And it's a very difficult situation. The American people are understandably losing confidence. And the number one failure, in my opinion, right now is President Biden hasn't laid out a vision of how this ends. If American taxpayers say we're going to give you more support, okay, what's the end game? How does this end? Is there a negotiated settlement? How will this lead to something that's to the benefit of the American people? And without that clarity of the end game, I'd be reluctant as a senator to stand up and support it. I have that responsibility to the taxpayers. So I'm pro standing with the Ukrainian people, but I wouldn't go forward without clarity from the Biden administration on how this money is going to make a real difference.
Okay. Let's go back to domestic issues now. What do you want to see done at the southern border? You had mentioned that earlier on. What programs are you behind that would help ease the crisis there?
This is a debacle, to state the obvious.
And a lot of voters care about it apparently right now.
Oh my Lord! Every state's a border state, and Pennsylvania in particular. I'll say why in a minute. But just to put this in perspective, we've had 9 million illegal entrants since President Biden came into office, and among those, able-bodied males There are more able-bodied males that entered illegally than exist in our entire armed forces, men and women. So the scale of this is incredible. Beyond that, 160 of those apprehended, these are the people that were caught, were on the terrorist watch list. So this is a big national security problem. It's a huge economic problem. We're spending billions of dollars to subsidize illegal immigrants across our country, across our Commonwealth. And then, of course, the fentanyl crisis. That fentanyl comes across the border by the cartels, is pushed through illegal entry points, and it's 5,000 deaths in Pennsylvania alone. So this is an enormous problem. And here's an example of where leadership matters and policy matters. So the border was a challenge under President Trump, but there was a set of policies that were put in place that created a much more secure border. President Biden ran against that policy and overturned it on day one. And we now see the consequences of that. So what would I do? I would go back to many of those Trump era policies. So the stay in Mexico policy, the idea that we should complete a border wall of sorts that would make it much more difficult to enter. I went to visit the border during the last campaign. I'm not exaggerating. You stand on this side of the Rio Grande and you can literally look up into the hedgerow and see members of the cartel pushing people across. So we've got to reinstate control. We've got to have enough resources to do that. We've got to adjust the policies. Right now what happens is, you know, all the illegal immigrants come across, and for the most part they all apply for asylum, and then they're for the most part released into the economy. So it's a process that's simply not working. Trump had it right, Biden had it wrong, and we need to go back to that set of policies and probably a lot more to get things in check.
Do you support a national ban on abortion? And if so, how extreme?
I don't support a national ban on abortion. I think this is an area where we've got to find common ground. I'm not for either extremes. I'm not for a national ban on abortion. I'm not for eliminating the 3 exceptions. I'm also not in support of abortion up until the day of birth, which is the position that's held by Senator Casey and the Democratic Party that voted for legislation along those lines. This is an area where we can find common ground. We can agree on widely available contraception. We can agree on that. We can agree on the government supporting adoption services. We can agree on supporting young women and young babies. And we can also agree on restrictions on late-term abortions. That's where the majority of Americans are. So the majority of Pennsylvanians are. And so that would be my position.
You've spent a lot of time in our neck of the woods here, specifically, you know, in Western PA. What are you hearing when you're out in these communities? What are some of the issues that people want to know about you, or how you stand, what your platform is? Yeah, well, this is McCormick country in the following sense. My dad was born in Marion Center in Indiana County, grew up here, went to IUP. My mom was born in Punxsutawney in Jefferson County. I was born in Washington County, south of Pittsburgh. And I had a good part of my adult life running a company in Pittsburgh. So I feel like even though I grew up in Bloomsburg near Scranton, my Western Pennsylvania is my home. And listen, I love it. I love the toughness, the resilience, the hardness of the people that live here. And they're unhappy. They're unhappy. They don't think the country is serving them well. The leadership of the country is serving them well. That economy I talked about, that's hurting. That's hurting them. People, I mean, you know, a pickup truck, the payments on a pickup truck have gone up 70%. New home, which a part of the American dream is, hey, if you work hard and, you know, play by the rules, you're going to be able to buy a home and raise your family. You know, new home sales are down by half. And the reason is that this economy is not working for the majority. So economic issues are front and center. How do we bring great jobs to Pennsylvania? How do we ensure that great jobs stay in Pennsylvania? How do we get our kids to come back when they leave Pennsylvania? These are the things on people's minds, and I think they believe that those in office, the elite in Washington or New York, have not served them well. And it's not been just the last couple of years; it's been the last 20 years. And so the reason I'm spending so much time making sure I'm visiting communities across our great Commonwealth in these rural areas in particular is I want to make sure that I'm focused on the right issues. And when I'm a senator, that I can really make a difference on the things that matter to Pennsylvanians. Last question. It appears at this time that Donald Trump will be on the ballot in November. And you said in your book, I believe, that he wanted you to deny the 2020 election results. What did you tell him, and do you stand behind that?
Yeah, I stand by everything I've said in the book, and essentially, here's the way I say it. I've said publicly that I'll endorse our nominee, whoever that is, including President Trump. President Trump's our nominee. I'll be behind him. I think his policies were great for our country. I think the contrast between the Biden agenda and the Trump agenda could be more clear, and I think would take us in a much better direction. I campaigned last time on many of President Trump's policies, but I'm also my own man. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna, when I believe something, I'm gonna say it. So I had said earlier, and I'll say it again, that I thought President Biden was the president, and that the election wasn't stolen, and that's the position I've held. But I certainly support President Trump if he's our nominee, and I'll win the Senate seat as a person who can promote those policies, but also as someone who Pennsylvanians can count on to be strong and independent in supporting them.